Hello, and welcome back to Catholic Reboot. Today, which is episode 11, is on the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. This is by far one of my most favorite topics because it is probably among Catholics today the most misunderstood part of our Catholic faith. Misunderstood because many of the younger Catholics weren't properly trained about the Mass. Any of those that converted to Catholicism after Vatican II never really learned the original, what we call Tridentine Mass. And so the educational process is just broken down over time. But let me explain what the Mass is in itself. Okay, so the Mass is the central liturgical rite for the Catholic Church. It encompasses the liturgy of the Word, right? Which is considered the Mass of the Catuchumens, which most people don't really know when that part of the Mass ends. So when they say the Mass of the Catuchumens, they're saying those people that can actually attend Mass without receiving the sacrament of communion. All right, and it used to be a time where it was officially announced that basically the Mass part of the catechumens is over, and now only those Catholics that are able to receive the Eucharist remain. Right, so that's the second part, and the liturgy of the Eucharist, which is referred to as Mass of the Faithful. So this is where the bread and wine are consecrated and through transubstantiation become the body and blood of Christ. Okay. So, as originally defined by the Church at the Council of Trent, here's the Council of Trent again, very important, and that was in 1571. In the Mass, the same Christ who offered himself once in a bloody manner on the altar of the cross is present and offered in an unbloodly manner at the Mass. So the beauty of the Mass is it completely encompasses our entire faith as Catholics, right? And as we go through the 18 different parts of the Mass, I'm going to point to how specific this relates to our faith, right? Okay, so the Catholic Church permits only baptized members in the state of grace, right? The Catholics who have recently confessed all of their sins, and the sacrament of communion to receive Christ in the Eucharist. Okay, that's why when you see certain bishops or priests distributing communion to non-Catholics, like there was a priest who distributed Holy Communion to Bill Clinton, can't do that. Or if you see a priest distributing communion to Nancy Pelosi and President Biden, because they are supporting doctrines against the faith, such as abortion and the perversions of homosexuality, they can't receive the Holy Eucharist because they're in a state of sin, right? But again, like everything else, it's like, oh, let that go. So it's that slippery slope that you never recover from. The term Mass is commonly used as equal to the Eucharist, right? Because the leading up of the Mass is for the consecration of the Holy Eucharist. Now, the term Mass, you may hear non-Catholics say, well, I'm going to go to Mass. Well, they're actually not. They're going to some sort of a church service because in order for it to be a Mass, it has to encompass the celebration of the Eucharist, and not just the celebration of Eucharist, but the consecration. So when we talk about transubstantiation, that's the consecration. So non-Catholics may refer to it as they're going to a church service, right? So where did the term Mass come from? It's actually derived from the Roman word ite missa est. And you'll, in the Tridentine Mass, you'll hear the priest say that towards the end of Mass, which is Latin for go, it is dismissed, or go, you are dismissed. So it's funny that they use that piece of dismissed and then kind of did conjunctive and broke it down into Mass. So Mass is you can now go. So that's just some of the background on the terminology. All right, now, what's important for you to know as Catholics is from the time of the Council of Trent, okay, which was 1570, the Church specifically categorized those elements of the Mass, and I will get into the Council of Trent, but for purposes of this, I want to show you the changes. So from 1570 to 1970, as Catholics, we celebrated what was called the Tridentine Mass, right? All they knew it as was the Catholic Mass, okay? What's interesting to know is why did the Council of Trent decide that they were going to make it formal as part of church doctrine? Because prior to that, Martin Luther had already broke away from the church and started the Protestant Reformation. So they gave it some time, and then they decided, okay, enough's enough. We need to call this council and start correcting significant heresies that Martin Luther and the Protestants are professing. Okay, so now why through 1970? Well, if you look at when Vatican II was called into order, it was started in 1962 by Pope John the 23rd, and it officially ended in 1965 under Pope Paul VI. Vatican II was actually just supposed to be the finalization of Vatican I, which was called back in the time of Pius the Ninth, which was in the 1860s. But because of a significant amount of turmoil going on in Rome at that time, they had to stop the council, and they just didn't reopen it. And when they did reopen it, it wasn't under the same spirit that Vatican I was opened. What happened is in the 1960s, the church decided to open up the windows and let the fresh air in, as they said, and many Catholics say what they ended up doing is letting the devil in, because they attacked so many pillars of our Catholic faith. To some, they say by 1965 we lost our faith, right? All right, but that's a whole nother issue. All right, so why is that significant? Because for many Catholics, they never experienced the original Mass. They were brought up under Vatican II. They learned the Mass according to Vatican II. Okay, what changed though? Well, much like cancellation culture, if you were a Catholic and you did not go along with the changes in Vatican II, you were basically told you're no longer Catholic. And let's say you stood up and said, I will not practice this new Mass, which they call the Novus Ordo Mass. Then there's no one to provide Mass, because the priests would have been thrown out by their bishops unless they performed the new Novus Ordo Mass. So we as Catholics know what it's like to be canceled today, like we are in our country. If we come from a conservative side, they're canceling us everywhere. We're used to it because we already got canceled. And we actually got canceled on a much more important thing than what we're going through here. So we got some thick skin by now. But what ended up happening is when Pope Benedict the 16th came in, he decided to issue a Summorum Pontificum, which is Latin for of the Supreme Pontiff. In other words, he's making a statement from the chair of Peter. And it was issued in July of 2007, which he specified that Catholics should never have been refused the Tridentine Mass. And he specified to all the priests and bishops that if the faithful came together and asked for the Tridentine Mass, they couldn't refuse it. Now, he referred back to not only the Tridentine Mass, but specifically the Missal of the Mass that was provided and updated by Pope John the 23rd, 1962. So he's basically pointing to the Tridentine Missal. Okay, all right. So what he did, though, that was a little unusual, I think I like to call it the Pontius Pilate move. Instead of just nipping in the bud and say that the Novus Ordo Mass is really not complete, right? We lost, or we stripped out too much of the Holy Mass, and we really just need to go back to it. We need to re-educate our kids. We need to retrain our priests. What he did is he compromised. He said, well, we're going to have two forms of Mass. We're going to have an extraordinary, which is the Tridentine Mass, and then we're going to have the ordinary, which is the Novus Ordo Mass that officially started in 1970. But I will tell you, growing up, I already saw the Novus Ordo Mass by 1967-68. Because I was very young. I was making my communion, and I remember we went from beautiful Gregorian chant and choir singing Schola to people up there with guitars doing the "Someone's singing Lord, Kumbaya." I mean, just complete departure. The liturgical music was just thrown out. To me, the sanctity was thrown out way before 1970. However, when I became an altar boy, it was in 1970, and I was trained in the new Mass, the Novus Ordo Mass. Okay, so that's a little background on how it is today that we have two Masses. You know, today we'll say that the media deceives the public by not reporting on something. They just don't cover it, so most people don't know about it. I'd say they learned that from the church. Nobody was told in 2007 that they had the right to participate in the Tridentine Mass. The church, the bishops, certain cardinals and priests, they weren't telling the faithful. Only those faithful that were doing their homework or wouldn't let go knew about it. The rest of the Catholics had no idea it was even going on, right? All right, so before we get into the elements of the Mass, or the parts of the Mass, I'm sorry, let's talk about how you should prepare, right? So I like to say there's certain things you should try to start over if you aren't already doing these. And the first is, and this is difficult, but it was even more difficult for me 15 years ago, 20 years ago, but try to find a church that says the Tridentine Mass. And depending on what state, city you're in, there is a listing of all those churches that provide that Mass in your area. For some, it may only be every other week or once a month. Do your best to seek it out, and if nothing else, become an observer if you don't know how to practice that Mass, okay? Number two, try something different. Don't arrive as Mass is starting. Arrive early and pray, okay? Now, it used to be the custom prior to Vatican II that people would come at least 15 minutes early. Some would come a half an hour early. And the reason for that is you're trying to get yourself in a sense of peace, because most of us live in very hectic lives, and if we rush into church, okay, and the mass is starting, there's this stark break, and we're just not prepared, and we probably aren't paying attention until we're a quarter way through the mass. In order to avoid this, get there early. What used to be the custom is a half an hour before mass, someone would lead the rosary. Why? Because the rosary is getting you into this meditative state and this penitive state, right? So you want to get into what we call a prayerful state for God and Christ, right? All right. If you knew a superstar was coming to your town, now I'll use my generation. Let's say we thought the Beatles were going to show up somewhere, right? Or just maybe one Beatle, right? Well, we would not only try to get there early, but we would be in awe. Oh my God, it's Paul McCartney, right? All right. How much more important should it be for us not to begrudgingly grab the kids, go to mass, try to get settled? This is Christ. Christ in the consecration is coming. Christ is there. In the tabernacle is Christ, okay? So even more so, we should be ready and excited for this awness of the supreme superstar, right? During the 70s, it was Jesus Christ Superstar, is there. And matter of fact, you really, really want to be honest with yourself. This is why people are what they call daily communicants. They go to mass every day because why? This is the only place where you're going to be able to experience Christ present in the Eucharist, right? Now, a lot of non-Catholics will say, oh no, I deal with Christ every day. It's him and I, that personal relationship with God. Okay, so the consecration has zero value then, right? All right, so that's the next point. Get prepared for the Mass, okay? Now, there's a good way to structure your prayer, right? So one is if it's going to be in the preparation of a litany or a rosary, something where you're giving praise. You're already taking yourself out of the state of me to thee, Christ, right? The other is, why not read the epistle and gospels for that day or that Sunday, so that when they're being read during Mass, you already heard it because you read it, and now you're hearing it a second time. Repetition is great. Why? So when the priest gives the sermon, what is the priest giving the sermon on? The epistle and the gospel, right? All right. Then you think about the times you have fallen and you ask pardon, right? You're in that penitive state. Now remember, this Mass hasn't even begun, and you're already 3 steps into it. Then you do a prayer for the church, your family, your friends, and give petition, and then thank God. Okay, so now before the sacristy bells ring, which I don't think the Novus Ordo will do that anymore, but to start the official Mass, you'll hear the altar boys ring the sacristy bell, announcing the beginning of the Holy Mass. You are already in, we'd like to say, almost a state of grace of mind, right? All right, now then, during the Mass, okay, you attend with attention, okay? In other words, you'll see people at Mass, they got their arms slung behind them, they're looking around, they're not attentive. They're not watching what is going on the holy altar, right? Get yourself to pay attention as much as you do a Netflix movie or a sports event, right? I mean, my gosh, above all, this is a trillion times more important, right? Also, reverence, right? It has become customary for Catholics to bring their conversations into church, right? It used to be that was unthinkable, right? It was always in the vestibule. You never walked into church talking. You were quiet. Why? Out of respect for the Holy Eucharist that's in the tabernacle. This is a holy place. Be reverent. If somebody goes to talk to you, don't be rude. Just probably say, "Can you wait till Mass is over? We'll speak outside." I've done that a couple times, and they'll give me a look like, "Well, who are you?" Right? Start practicing that, and it catches on. If everybody you're dealing with knows, don't talk to him or her, because they're not going to pay attention to you. Reverence is learned. If your kids are running around making noise, take them out. All right. Better yet, when I was raised in the faith, I don't know what I was like as a toddler, but by the time I was in kindergarten, I knew. I opened my mouth and it's bam, right? We were taught this is a holy place. You need to pay attention. You'll see a lot of parents letting their kids run around, play with each other, giving them cookies and crackers, and it's like, what is this? A gymnasium, right? Teach them at a young age to have reverence, right? And then overall, the devotion and prayer responses with the priest are utmost necessary, because the Mass is the priest conducting the holy sacrifice of the Mass, and we're joining in. That's why they always say under the Tridentine Mass, it comes from the faithful through the priest through Christ. Okay? The new Mass comes from the priest to the people outside. I kind of missed a step there, right? So that's important. Now, here's another thing. The way you dress says a lot, right? So if you were to go to a wedding feast and you decided to wear an AC/DC shirt that's ripped and cut jeans, and you walked in and said, "Hey, what's up?" Right? People look at you and say, it's such a disrespect for the bride and groom, right? What more respect is required than for Christ? When it used to be everyone had their Sunday best, and they would have a specific suit or dress, and that was their Sunday clothes, right? We've lost the concept of respect, and we come any way we want. Some women come modestly dressed, chest hanging out, short shorts, things on their shirt that could even be perverted sayings. So when you come to the Mass, come dressed to the nines, as we used to say, for Christ, right? So, Jesus taught us in John 6 at the Last Supper, he becomes physically and divinely present in the Holy Eucharist. This is what we're attending, and this requires respect. And the sign of respect is how you're dressed. And so I would say, a man should have a coat and tie, or at least a blazer with a buttoned up shirt. A woman should have a longer skirt, okay? Her shoulders should be covered, no cleavage showing. In the traditional Mass, you'll see the women with, my gosh, I just went blank on it, with a head covering, a veil of some kind. The reason for that was women, by character, are attractive, okay? And so what they're supposed to do is take all attention off of them, right? And all attention goes up through Christ. That's why they would cover their head, right? Because in the new Mass, if you go in, you won't see any of that, okay? And they say, well, that was superstitious. Well, I'll tell you how serious it was in the Tridentine Mass. The type of veil, head covering that they had, mantilla, I think they call it. I think it's a mantilla, or chapel veil. It signified what they were. So if they had a white one, they were not married. If they had a colored one, they were married, which even signifies more. Don't be looking at that married woman. She's spoken for. All right, so for anybody that's going to Mass for the first time, it's really important to keep in mind that this Mass is representing the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross at Calvary, because as Catholics we believe he is truly present on the altar, right? We're not making any excuses for our belief, okay? We're not compromising on that. If you've never attended the Tridentine Mass, or as Pope Benedict called it, the extraordinary form, or the traditional Latin Mass, the best thing you could do is you don't do too much preparation. Just go, watch, listen, just take it in, right? And I would say do that for quite a while. And then you should buy yourself the missal, okay? Because then you need to learn it. And I will say, when I left the Novus Ordo Mass and went to the traditional Mass, I was already in my late 30s. And it only took me, I would say, a good 2 months before it all clicked and I got it. And I used to say that when I went to the Novus Ordo Mass, I never felt the Mass itself was worthy of Christ. It was, to me, there was just so much disrespect going on during the Mass, with the talking, the way they dressed, the music. The musical liturgy was a disgrace. The way the priests conducted themselves on the altar, the informality of the altar boys, the informality between the priest and the penitents at Mass, right? But when I learned the Tridentine Mass, what was funny is I didn't feel I was worthy of the Mass, right? And that says something. All of a sudden, you do say to yourself, this is not only absolutely beautiful, it is now, for the first time in my life, I'm saying, am I even worthy to be receiving Christ this way, right? So I will go through all the parts of the Tridentine Mass next. And like I said, I'm going to show in a chart the difference between the Tridentine Mass and the Novus Ordo Mass, and why there is what I call a stark difference in what they eliminated, right? And then we'll also discuss how do you use a missal, okay? So that's next. And I hope you don't take from this opening that I'm trying to say that I know better or I am better. I'm just trying to say that I experienced it firsthand. I went through all these changes, and I fought the fight during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So before I finally said enough is enough, I probably had a good 25 years in trying to fight for what I knew to be something that was stolen for us, a huge deposit of faith in the Mass. And then I decided, enough complaining, go practice. And through that, I started coming around like-minded, and it started to grow. I saw a big change within, a 10-year period. And so the way we teach is by doing most of the time, and not by saying. So I had already raised my children in the Novus Ordo Mass, even in the new Catholicism. And what I had to try to start to do as they were coming out of college and ready to get married, I had to say, sorry, but I think I blew it as a parent. You need to look at this. You need to take a closer look at the Mass, right? So we are always parents to our children. If we're 90, we still feel responsible to come back and say, look, I need to correct something. Either I did wrong or something I found that was false in the faith. Okay, but let's talk about the Mass.